It's the end of The Witcher 3, Blood and Wine, as Geralt stares at the player, reflecting on the end of his journey. We're left in a somewhat strange position. On the one hand, we've just concluded a trilogy of games that CD Projekt RED had worked on for nearly 10 years, but on the other hand, it's a trilogy that a large amount of other players only played the third instalment of, leaving them wanting more, already pondering a sequel. With the narrative threads that The Witcher 3 brought forward from the novels being wrapped up how they were, it gives the Polish studio a myriad of possible directions to steer the franchise. Who will be the protagonist? Where will we be? When will we be? So we have to ask, The Witcher 4, what's next?
Recognize this medallion? You know what it means.
Get everybody together. Time to talk.
One of the biggest questions is undoubtedly, who will lead the next Witcher game? Geralt, Ciri, or both? At the end of the third game, Geralt seems to be settling down. After all, he's nearing his 100th birthday, and wondering if he'll be the first Witcher to die in his bed. Meanwhile, Ciri has story threads still open to explore, with her connections to her father, the Emperor, and her connections with Avallac'h and the NL Elves. Of course, a joint storyline is the most likely, as Geralt and Ciri are linked by fate.
Ciri came out of Brokilon with me. I sent her back to her grandmother then. But already I felt bound to her.
By destiny.
By something more.
Something similar to the 5-novel series which jumped between Geralt and Ciri at regular intervals. This could be implemented as 2 fully playable characters in different locations, rather than the short flashback sequences we had with Ciri in the third game. I have 2 main concepts for a Geralt-led Witcher 4, one being a sequel, with the other being a prequel. If you haven't read Sapkowski's Witcher books, you might not know that, at his youngest, Geralt is around 50 years old during his first appearance in the books, with him in his 90s during the events of The Witcher 3.
You're near a century old yourself.
This would give CDPR a huge 30 to 35 year period to write a young Geralt story. The story before Ciri, before Yennefer, even before Dandelion. It's a unique opportunity for the studio to create large parts of Geralt's origin story alongside the parts that are already established, like his relationships with Vesemir, Eskel and Lambert, or his estranged mother, the sorceress Visina. A prequel could show a more naive, wide-eyed Geralt, who is perhaps a more physically capable fighter than he was before being injured by Vilgefortz. The antagonists of an origin story are more open too, perhaps being more grounded in politics and monster hunting, with Geralt learning his trade and profession, and less focused on world-ending threats like the White Frost or the Wild Hunt. If it's a sequel, my favourite theme for Old Man Geralt
Damn, I look old.
is the theme of succession, meaning the future of witches, as well as Geralt and Yennefer's desire to have children. I can hear you saying, but witches and sorceresses can't have children, right? Well, yes and no. This part of the lore has always been deliberately contrasted with the fact that Geralt himself is the son of a sorceress. This is why Geralt was able to survive a second trial of grasses, to make him more powerful as a witcher. It's also what turned his hair white. Alongside this idea is the death of the Witcher caste, which could be saved if circumstances require Witcher schools to be rebuilt and re-established. Perhaps after Ciri and Avallac'h triggered their own mini-conjunction of the spheres on Undvik at the end of The Witcher 3's main story, they released a new slew of monsters across the continent which now need dealing with. Ciri could have disappeared again in her search for anonymity, so the premise here would be Geralt and Yennefer being summoned by a collection of rulers from across the land and tasked with the reconstruction of the Witcher profession, finding old Witchers from the various schools, making a safer formula for the trial of grasses that had a higher mortality rate, and perhaps adding new entries to the bestiary with the new creatures that have appeared. Alongside this, Geralt and Yen would seek out Vicina's location to try and help them fulfill their dream of having a child, asking her how she did the same. While this setup doesn't have an obvious antagonist, CD Projekt RED have shown themselves to be extremely capable of writing original antagonists, with Gaunter Odim, Dettlaff and Letho all being examples of nuanced enemies with many shades of grey throughout their arcs. I do feel like Ciri is the main link to the larger threats. There's still the looming presence of the NL, who will have new rulers after the death of Eredin and his forces. The scheming Nilfgaardian Empire will no doubt have machinations for Ciri and all of the North. And there could be the re-emergence of a magic guild, like the Lodge, or a powerful individual like Vilgefortz. All of these forces have had plans for Ciri and her elder blood at some point in time. Regardless of what CDPR consider the canon ending of the game, Ciri as a Witcher or Ciri as an Empress, with Ciri as the protagonist, it raises questions over how her powers have changed after dealing with the White Frost. Because designing the game around her original power level is difficult, as she's simply too strong. It changes things from a gameplay perspective. While Ciri is trained as a Witcher, she's not a Witcher physically, so her powers would need to be reduced in some way, or the game would need to take on a faster action style of gameplay to fit around Ciri's abilities, which would be an exciting change of pace. They could simply reuse the plot device from the third game, where the use of Ciri's teleporting ability results in her being tracked by someone dangerous, so she only uses it in desperate circumstances. My main idea for the continuation of Ciri's story is connected heavily to the role of Avallac'h. With Eredin out of the way, I feel like the sage's true plans for Cirilla will emerge, with him eager to bring the Elder Blood back to Tir na Liar. After all, we don't really know how conclusively the White Frost has been dealt with. Maybe the land of the NL is still at risk. Ciri's biggest theme as a character has always been how the Elder Blood has constricted her life, meaning she'll never truly be free or live a normal life.
Problem is, you're not. You were born to greatness.
As I've been hearing since I was born. All because of this damned Elder Blood. My gift. My curse. It granted me all of these powers, but it's also why I've spent my life fleeing, hiding.
Personally, I could imagine a scenario where all three major players, being the NL, the Lodge, and Nilfgaard, are all aggressively pursuing Ciri, where there's a constant tug of war around who to trust and finding safety. One element that was explored in The Witcher 1's story is time travel. We know that Ciri is known as the Lady of Time and Space. She talks openly about jumping between worlds.
They call Ciri the Lady of Space and Time. Once I asked Yennefer why. She travels between worlds.
I go wherever I please, whenever I please.
Maybe the biggest threat we could face is something completely unknown from somewhere else in time. While I wasn't necessarily a fan of the first game creating another character with the Elder Blood, as it seemed more like an imitation of the novels rather than a continuation, we can't rule out the reappearance of Alvin or Jack de Aldersberg. Considering that they are actively remaking the original game, it could involve major story revisions to make the presence of the Grand Master more lore consistent to then tie him in to future games. These sequel ideas for a game focused solely on Geralt or Ciri could be easily unified into a joint storyline, which I feel is the most likely if they don't jump backwards or forwards a significant amount of time. You have Geralt tied to more grounded affairs like monster hunting and getting stuck in the middle of politics, and you have Ciri tied to the bigger threats and concepts. Perhaps the studio has plans for multiple titles with differing protagonists, but I imagine that any major sequel will put Geralt and Ciri's intertwined fate at the heart of it. My personal choice would actually be a prequel with young Geralt. I think it would be an excellent change and allow a mass amount of new and original characters to show up that aren't bound to the storylines that are already established from the games and from the books. Outside of the two obvious lead character choices of Geralt and Ciri, I wonder how seriously the studio has considered a player-created character, moving towards a full RPG-style Witcher game. Perhaps we could go back in time to the golden age of Witchers, when all of the major schools were still functional, creating our own Witcher and choosing to start at one of the many schools that could have their own locations, maps and playstyles based around them, visiting the other schools' regions at different points in the story depending on where you start. They could take forward lessons learned from using a player-created character in Cyberpunk 2077, moving away from the specifics of the characters Sapkowski created and using the world and lore to create their own story. The various Witcher schools are an element of the lore that the studio have built beyond the books anyway, and this could be a way of taking it even further. This led to the idea of spin-off games, entries in the series that could exist alongside other games that tackle Geralt and Ciri's continued story. Personally, I love the idea of playing as Eskel, Lambert, Letho, or a younger Vesemir, possibly in a shorter, self-contained story that's similar in scope to, say, Blood and Wine, in the vein of games like Uncharted: The Lost Legacy that are perhaps a little cheaper in price, but have all the hallmarks of the main games like the final Witcher 3 expansion did. It's worth reiterating how Witchers have longer lifespans, meaning there's a huge period of time to go back to when exploring the adventures of other Witchers. Maybe we could actually live through Lambert's time spent in Lan Exeter, see how Vesemir fell in love, or see some more of the southern regions around the Viper School with Letho. Beyond the characters and the timeline, one aspect of the next Witcher game I'm eager to discover is where it will take place. The landscape of the Northern Realms and beyond is massive. My number one choice of locations has to be Kovir and Povis in the north, an independent, neutral state, rich with gold and mining resources, with its two major cities of Lan Exeter and Pont Vanis sounding like a decadent reimagining of Venice. Getting to see the non-human territories would also be a welcome change of pace, maybe visiting the dwarfs in Mahakam, or the elves in Dol B'Thana, perhaps even a full map of Tir na Liar with the NL. If Ciri was on the run, fleeing much further afield would also make sense, perhaps visiting the great warriors in Zerrikania, or even sailing to the mysterious Aphir. Maybe a homecoming for Ciri in Sintra is in order too. The south is an outside possibility too in Nilfgaard, maybe more vampire adventures with Regis. There are lots of options and possibilities for CD Projekt RED to explore with the Witcher franchise. What direction would you like to see them go? Geralt or Ciri? A sequel or a prequel? What region of the map would you love to see fully realised? Would you want to create your own Witcher character? Which side character would you like to play as in a spin-off game? I focused on the story and characters here, but what changes would you like to see in the gameplay? I imagine that after the dust has settled on the release of Phantom Liberty, we'll start to see more hints and promotion for the next Witcher installment, and I can't wait to see what they create. Just make sure Eorveth shows up this time.